The day a German commander realized the war was already lost, all because of a few simple gasoline drums left behind in the snow. December 17th, 1944, 5:30 in the morning, Belgium. The engine of the Tiger tank, one of the most powerful fighting machines ever built, coughed, sputtered, and died. Joachim Peiper, a commander of the SS, the elite unit of the German army, slammed his fist against the hatch in fury. His driver tried again to start the 700 horsepower engine. Nothing. The fuel gauge read 0. The reserve tank was empty too. Peiper climbed down onto the frozen Belgian ground. Around him, the spearhead of the most powerful force the German army had assembled for Operation Watch on the Rhine, the famous Ardennes offensive, stood completely still. 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, armored trucks with rear treads, and nearly 5,000 of Germany's best-trained soldiers, all paralyzed for lack of fuel. Through the morning fog, Peiper saw the abandoned American outpost ahead. Honsfeld. The Americans had fled so fast they'd left fires burning in oil drums, coffee still hot in metal mugs, and there lined up like a divine gift stood row after row of drums, thousands of them, the distinctive olive-green American fuel cans. Peiper approached slowly, almost reverently. One of his officers opened a drum and sniffed. High-octane gasoline. His men began the frantic work of refueling their vehicles. Peiper walked through the depot counting. The math was staggering. 190,000 liters. Enough to power his entire battle group to the Meuse River. Enough to potentially change the course of the offensive. The Americans had abandoned more fuel in this single dump than most German divisions had received in the last 6 months. But as Peiper watched his men pour American gasoline into German tanks, a crushing realization settled over him, like the morning fog. If the Americans could afford to leave behind such quantities, if they could abandon what Germany guarded with entire divisions, then this war was already over. Germany had not merely miscalculated, it had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of its enemy. 6 months before Peiper's discovery at Honsfeld, in June 1944, Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister, had presented Hitler with a report that should have ended all offensive operations immediately. Germany AS synthetic fuel production, the lifeblood of its army, had been systematically destroyed by Allied bombing. The plants that had produced 175,000 tons of fuel in April managed only 5,000 tons in September. The hydrogenation plants, special factories that turned coal into gasoline, were operating at less than 10% of capacity. The numbers told a story of inevitable defeat. In 1944, the United States produced 1,800,000,000 barrels of crude oil. Germany, including all synthetic production and the captured Romanian oil fields, managed 33 million barrels, less than 2% of American output. The Third Reich was trying to fight a mechanized war with horse-drawn logistics, while America drowned its armies in oil abundance. A German major in the logistics command had calculated that the Ardennes offensive would require 17 million liters of fuel to reach Antwerp. Hitler allocated 19 million, but only half was delivered due to transport problems. The German High Command was betting the entire offensive on capturing enemy supplies, a strategy that revealed terminal weakness rather than strength. The Americans, meanwhile, had built a pipeline system across France and the Red Ball Express, a massive truck convoy network delivering 12,500 tons of supplies daily to the front lines. By December 1944, American forces in Europe were consuming 4.5 million liters of fuel per day and receiving 5.3 million. They were stockpiling reserves even as they fought. Joachim Peiper was no fool. At 29, he was one of the youngest SS regimental commanders, a veteran of the Eastern Front, where he had learned that in modern war, fuel was more precious than ammunition. His battle group had been designated the decisive thrust of the entire Ardennes offensive. On December 14th, 2 days before the offensive, Peiper attended the final briefing. The general was blunt. "You will have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture American supplies." The fuel allocation for Peiper AS Group was 117,000 liters, enough for 80 kilometers of combat operations. The distance to the Meuse was 105 kilometers. The math of failure was built into the plan from the start. As his column prepared to advance on December 16th, Piper issued strict orders. Tanks would move in single file to conserve fuel. Engines would be shut off during any stop longer than 5 minutes. And capturing American fuel dumps was the #1 priority, above even tactical objectives. The contrast with American operations could not have been starker. That same morning, a captain from the 743rd U.S. Tank Battalion, stationed just 32 kilometers from Piper TS start line, noted in his unit diary that they had received 30,000 liters of fuel resupply, the third delivery that week, and that their storage tanks were already full. December 16th, 1944, 5:30 a.m. The German artillery barrage that opened the operation used more ammunition in 2 hours than the entire German army had been allotted for whole campaigns earlier in the war. Yet even this impressive display masked critical shortages. Piper's column began to move at 7 o'clock, already behind schedule. The roads that looked like highways on German maps turned out to be narrow country lanes, many unpaved. Within hours, traffic jams formed as vehicles designed for the Russian steppes struggled through the Ardennes forest. At Lanzerath, their first objective, they met unexpected resistance from a single American reconnaissance platoon. 18 men who held off the most powerful German armored column for nearly 10 hours. During the delay, Piper's vehicles sat idling, burning precious fuel. When they finally broke through and reached Honsfeld at dawn on December 17th, Piper's column had covered 32 kilometers and consumed 40% of its fuel. At that rate, they would run dry before reaching the halfway point to the Meuse. The American supply dump at Honsfeld wasn't even a main facility. It was an advanced supply point for the 99th Infantry Division, what the U.S. Army classified as a temporary fuel depot. Yet what Piper found there exceeded the monthly fuel allocation for an entire German panzer division. One of his officers later testified, "We found pyramids of drums, each containing 19 liters of gasoline. They were stacked 3 meters high, stretching perhaps 200 meters. The Americans hadn't even tried to destroy them. The captured fuel was high-octane aviation gasoline mixed with motor fuel, 80 octane or higher. German vehicles, especially the temperamental Maybach engines in Tiger tanks, were designed for 74 octane. The American gasoline was actually too good, causing engine problems in several German vehicles. As Piper's men refueled, they made more discoveries. A sergeant found shipping manifests in the depot office. He could read English, having worked in his father's import business before the war. The papers showed that this fuel had been shipped from Texas to New York, crossed the Atlantic to Liverpool, then over the Channel to Normandy, and trucked 640 kilometers to Honsfeld. The journey, more than 9,600 kilometers, had taken less than 6 weeks. "I showed the papers to Commander Piper," the sergeant recalled in a 1976 interview. "He read them twice, then crumpled them up. He said nothing, but his face went pale. We both understood what it meant." A private found a pile of American military newspapers dated December 15th, just 2 days earlier. The headline celebrated the opening of a new fuel pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun, capable of delivering 1.1 million liters per day. A single pipeline moving more fuel daily than Piper's entire battle group would use in the whole offensive. To grasp the shock of Piper's discovery, one must understand Germany's fuel situation in late 1944. Since May, Allied bombing had reduced synthetic fuel production by 90%. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, was grounding planes for lack of aviation fuel. Pilot training had been cut from 250 flight hours to 60. The German Navy had effectively ceased operations. Submarines were fitted with snorkels, special breathing tubes, to save diesel by running on batteries longer. On the home front, German civilians hadn't seen private automobile traffic since 1942. Gasoline was so precious that the Gestapo, the secret police, investigated black market theft of individual liters. Farmers were returning to horse-drawn plows. Meanwhile, the United States was producing 67% of the world's oil. The East Texas oil field alone produced more oil than all of German-occupied Europe combined. American refineries were operating at such capacity that Standard Oil was experimenting with new petroleum byproducts simply because they had a surplus of crude. With the 190,000 liters captured at Honsfeld, Piper's columns pushed on. They reached Bullingen by noon on December 17th, seizing additional supplies, rations, ammunition, and, most importantly, maps showing other American fuel depots in the area. But the maps revealed a troubling truth. The Americans had fuel reserves everywhere. Every major crossroads had a depot. The U.S. First Army alone held 13 million liters in reserve. Even this war crime was linked to fuel desperation. Piper later claimed he couldn't afford the gasoline to transport prisoners. By nightfall on December 17th, Piper's spearhead reached Stavelot, site of a massive American fuel depot containing more than 7.5 million liters. Here was enough fuel to guarantee a drive to the Meuse. But as the first German vehicles approached, American engineers were already at work. A U.S. combat engineer captain had received warning of the German advance. His orders were simple: deny the enemy fuel at all costs. The Stavelot depot held 8.3 million liters of gasoline in drums stacked across 6 hectares. At 4:30 p.m. on December 17th, as Piper's vanguard neared, the captain gave the order. Engineers poured trails of gasoline between the stacks. White phosphorus grenades, which burned intensely on contact with air, were distributed. A technical sergeant threw the first grenade. The explosion was immediate and tremendous, he later recalled. A wall of fire rose maybe 30 meters high. Within minutes, the entire depot was an inferno. Piper's lead tanks arrived to find a column of black smoke rising 300 meters into the sky. The blaze would burn for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to have powered Piper's entire division to Antwerp and back. One of his officers described the scene. The commander stood on his tank's turret watching the flames. He said nothing for perhaps 5 minutes. Then he climbed down and told me, "They can afford to burn 7.5 million liters just to deny them to us. What are we doing here?" Across the Ardennes, American engineers were destroying fuel depots rather than risk their capture. At Trois Ponts, 4.2 million liters were burned. At Spa, 9.5 million liters were destroyed. In total, the Americans deliberately destroyed more than 30 million liters during the first week, more than Germany had allocated for the entire operation. The ability to casually destroy millions of liters rested on a supply system beyond German comprehension. The Red Ball Express had delivered 412,000 tons of supplies, using 6,000 trucks operating 24 hours a day. Each truck consumed 150 liters daily. The operation itself burned more fuel than the German Army Group B received in a month. By December 1944, the U.S. Motor Transport Service employed 230 truck companies running on color-coded routes. The system delivered 20,000 tons of supplies daily, including 3,000 tons of fuel. The chief of logistics for the U.S. First Army recorded on December 18th that fuel receipts from the previous day totaled 7 million liters, with 6.1 million liters delivered, and a net gain of 850,000 liters added to reserves. The pipeline system was even more impressive. Operation Pluto had laid pipelines across the English Channel, pumping 3.8 million liters daily from Great Britain. A network of pipelines extended inland. The Cherbourg-Paris line delivered 3 million liters daily, and the Seine line moved 2.5 million liters. By December 1944, Allied forces in northwestern Europe were consuming 28 million liters daily, while receiving 31 million liters. They were building reserves during offensive operations. As Piper pushed deeper into Belgium on December 18th, the impossibility of Germany's position became clear. At one point, they captured another depot. 19,000 liters consumed in 3 hours of fighting. The Tiger tanks burned 9.5 liters per kilometer in combat. Panthers, another type of German tank, burned 5.7 liters per kilometer. In the difficult terrain of the Ardennes, consumption increased by 40%. The maintenance officer of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment recorded that by noon on December 18th, they had consumed 253,000 liters since the start of the offensive. They had captured perhaps 208,000 liters. they were operating at a deficit. The Americans, monitoring German radio traffic through Ultra, the code name for intercepted and decrypted enemy communications, were fully aware of Piper's fuel situation. General Courtney Hodges ordered all units. The enemy is critically low on fuel. Destroy all gasoline stocks threatened with capture. That same day, American C-47 transport aircraft flew 316 sorties delivering supplies to Bastogne, a surrounded town, including 605,000 liters of fuel. The Americans were flying more gasoline to an encircled garrison than Piper's entire battle group possessed. By December 19th, as Piper's forces faced defenders at Stoumont, the fuel crisis had become critical. Tanks were being abandoned with empty fuel tanks rather than battle damage. Piper consolidated his remaining fuel, perhaps 30,000 liters, enough for either one engagement or one retreat, but not both. Meanwhile, Allied planners were preparing for January operations. One brigadier general requested 930 million liters for the following month. The request was approved without discussion. The contrast extended beyond quantity. American vehicles were standardized for efficiency. Sherman tanks consumed 3 liters per kilometer compared to the Tiger's 9.5. American trucks achieved 3.4 kilometers per liter when fully loaded. Parts were interchangeable, and maintenance was streamlined. German forces operated a bewildering variety of captured and domestically produced vehicles, each with different requirements. French tanks required different oil than German Panthers. Soviet trucks needed different parts than German Opels. Every variation multiplied logistical difficulties. On December 20th, Piper received a radio message. Fuel convoy destroyed by Allied aircraft. Resupply impossible. Continue with available resources. Piper gathered his commanders. One was blunt. We have fuel for perhaps 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30 kilometers away. According to an officer's testimony, the commander said, "Gentlemen, we have discovered we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we receive for the entire operation. What we captured at Honsfeld, which seemed miraculous, was nothing to them. We cannot win." This realization was spreading. The general commanding the 5th Panzer Army later wrote, "When I learned the Americans had destroyed 30 million liters rather than risk us capturing them, I knew the offensive had failed before it began." A colonel captured on December 23rd told his interrogators, "Your soldiers throw away chocolate. My men haven't seen chocolate in 2 years. You burn millions of liters. We count by the liter. How can we fight against such abundance?" By December 21st, Piper was surrounded at L'Église, his tanks immobilized. The American forces encircling him, the 31st Infantry Division, the 82nd Airborne, and the 3rd Armored, had a combined fuel allocation of 1.3 million liters for December 21st alone. Piper had perhaps 3,800 liters. One American private wrote home, "We've got Germans surrounded who ran out of gas. Our captain jokes that we use more fuel heating coffee than they have for tanks." The American response demonstrated industrial warfare at its peak. Patton S. 3rd Army pivot northward required 1.3 million liters just for redeployment, considered impossible by German standards, yet completed in 3 days. December 23rd brought clear skies. Allied aircraft flew 2,000 sorties, each burning fuel at rates that would have grounded the Luftwaffe for weeks. P-47 fighter bombers consumed 1,100 liters per hour. B-26 bombers burned 750 liters per hour. A single day of air operations consumed more than the entire German offensive's fuel allocation. On the night of December 23rd to 24th, Piper abandoned his vehicles and escaped on foot. Of the 119 tanks and assault guns that began the offensive, 39 remained operational but immobilized. These were destroyed with the remaining ammunition. An officer described the scene. "We drained the last fuel from every vehicle, perhaps 750 liters in total." The commander personally destroyed his command tank. Millions in equipment lost to empty fuel tanks. Of the 5,000 men who began with Piper's battle group, roughly 770 returned. They had advanced 96 kilometers, captured several depots, and uncovered the truth about Allied logistics. News of Piper's discoveries spread quickly through the German command. On December 26th, Field Marshal Walter Model received reports on captured American supplies. His chief of staff recorded Model AS reaction. The Field Marshal read the quantities twice: 190,000 liters at Honsfeld, 7.5 million burned at Stavelot, 30 million destroyed rather than captured. He said, "We are not fighting the same war." Hitler, informed on December 28th, refused to accept reality. Speer wrote that Hitler insisted the numbers were propaganda. When shown photographs of Stavelot burning, he claimed they were Hollywood effects. But the lower ranks understood. A soldier wrote to his wife, "The Americans destroy more fuel in a day than we receive in a month. They drive tanks the way we march. This war is lost." The fuel crisis was symptomatic of a larger truth. By 1944, America produced 50% of the world's manufacturing output. A new airplane every 5 minutes, a ship every day, a tank every 7 minutes. The oil production statistics were staggering. The United States, 1,800,000,000 barrels. The Soviet Union, 110 million barrels. Germany, including synthetic, 33 million barrels. Japan, 2.6 million barrels. The entire Axis combined produced less than 2% of American oil output. Every major German offensive after 1942 had been limited by fuel. Every American offensive was supported by an abundance that German planners could not even imagine. A lieutenant colonel recorded a revealing incident on December 27th. A logistics officer reported that bad weather had reduced fuel deliveries to only 1.9 million liters per day. There was concern until someone noted that this still exceeded the total allocation for the entire German offensive. German prisoners of war from the Ardennes were more shocked by American waste than by American firepower. Watching US soldiers discard half-eaten rations or use gasoline for heating broke morale more effectively than artillery. A captured German officer told interrogators, "We knew your production numbers in theory, but seeing soldiers waste more than we possessed made them real. Every German who saw your casual abundance knew the war was hopeless." This knowledge spread through letters despite censorship. One soldier wrote, "The Americans wash clothes with gasoline. They feed chocolate to dogs. They fire artillery for Christmas. We cannot fight against infinity." The psychological impact undermined Germany's racial superiority narrative. How could the so-called decadent Americans possess such wealth, while the master race scraped for necessities? During the Nuremberg trials, German leaders consistently cited logistics, particularly fuel, as decisive. One field marshal testified, "We held operational superiority from 1940 to 41. By 1944, we could no longer move forces for lack of fuel, while the Americans moved armies like chess pieces." Piper, tried for the Malmedy massacre, offered revealing testimony. Every decision after December 17th was influenced by fuel shortages. We could not maneuver, pursue, or retreat effectively. The Americans moved freely while we counted liters. A general later wrote, "When Piper captured 190,000 liters, everything to him but nothing to the Americans, the war ended." The story endures because it represents the moment industrial warfare reached its conclusion. Wars were now won by production statistics, not warrior courage. The romantic notion of war died in the Ardennes among empty fuel tanks. One historian calculated that by 1944, Allied to Axis production ratios exceeded 5 to 1 in most major categories and approached 50 to 1 in oil. Such advantages could not be overcome by superior training or tactics. America produced 324,750 aircraft during the war. Germany built 119,000. The Americans produced 88,410 tanks. Germany, 46,857. But most revealing of all, America refined 1,800,000,000 barrels of oil in 1944 alone, while Germany scraped together 33 million. December 24th, 1944. As Piper's men slipped through American lines on foot, abandoning 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 177 other vehicles. The magnitude became clear. They had captured 190,000 liters, seemingly miraculous, only to realize it was meaningless to an enemy who could burn millions. One of Piper's officers reflected in 1975, "That morning in Honsfeld, finding American fuel, we celebrated as if we'd won the lottery. By the afternoon, when we learned Stavelot was burning, we understood we had already lost. The Americans had so much they could destroy what we would die to possess. The 190,000 liters were less than what a single American armored division consumed in 2 days, less than what the Red Ball Express burned in 3 hours, a rounding error in Allied daily consumption." A U.S. Major General later wrote that the Germans' desperate attempts to seize fuel revealed their fatal miscalculation. They assumed we valued fuel as they did, as irreplaceable. They could not comprehend that we had so much we could burn millions rather than risk a tactical disadvantage. Operation Watch on the Rhine failed through the immutable mathematics of industrial war. The offensive consumed roughly 10.6 million liters, 40% of its total allocation, the rest made up by captured supplies. During the same period, the Americans consumed 1,010 million liters, nearly 100 times more. The German army lost 100,000 men, 800 tanks, 1,000 aircraft. But the most devastating loss was that of illusion. Every German who witnessed American abundance understood that Germany was no longer fighting a war. It was participating in its own execution. Joachim Piper survived, imprisoned until 1956 for war crimes. On July 14, 1976, he was murdered in his French home by unknown assailants. But in 1967, he told a historian, "Finding that depot was the worst thing. If we had run out of fuel sooner, we might have withdrawn with dignity. Instead, we discovered that the Americans had oceans while we had drops. We discovered the impossible." The lesson extends far beyond the Second World War. In industrial warfare, logistics surpass tactics. Production overwhelms courage. Abundance defeats dedication. The German soldier of 1944 was arguably better trained and more experienced. It didn't matter. The Americans were backed by an industrial machine capable of wasting more than Germany could produce. This truth was encoded in every fuel drum at Honsfeld, every liter burned at Stavelot, every pipeline across France. Wars between industrial powers would be won by factories and refineries, not by brilliant generals. One colonel calculated that in December 1944, every American soldier was supported by 30 kilograms of supplies daily. Each German received 1.4 kilograms. The Americans complained about waste. The Germans would have viewed American waste as unimaginable abundance. In 1984, 40 years after the battle, veterans gathered at La Glaise. The museum displays Piper's Tiger tank, still positioned where it ran out of fuel on December 23, 1944. A former German officer stood beside it with a former staff sergeant from the U.S. 30th Infantry Division. "We always wondered why you stopped," said the American. "We thought it was tactical." The German laughed bitterly. "We stopped because the tanks were empty. You burned millions just to keep it from us. How could we fight against that?" The American was silent for a moment, then said, "We never knew you were that short. We had so much. We never thought about it." That exchange captured the truth of December 1944. One side measured by the liter, the other by the million. One fought for every drum, the other burned oceans. The outcome was predetermined. German records provide damning evidence. The War Diary of Army Group B, December 1944, December 16th. Offensive begins, fuel at 70% of minimum. December 17th. Piper captures 190,000 liters. December 18th, multiple depots destroyed, 19 million liters lost. December 19th, fuel critical, units immobilized. December 24th, Piper abandons vehicles, fuel exhausted. Meanwhile, the reports of the U.S. First Army read almost casually. December 16th, reserves 14 million liters. December 17th, 8.3 million destroyed. December 18th, 6.8 million received. December 24th, reserves 15.5 million. The Americans treated millions with the same indifference the Germans reserved for individual drums. Beyond quantity, American fuel represented technological superiority. U.S. refineries perfected catalytic cracking, a special chemical process producing higher octane more efficiently than German hydrogenation. American 100-octane aviation fuel gave planes performance advantages over German aircraft running on 87-octane synthetic fuel. The Americans also perfected additives Germany couldn't replicate: tetraethyl lead, ethylene dibromide, detergents. German engines designed for lower quality often malfunctioned on captured American gasoline. Fuel scarcity shaped every soldier's experience. A German soldier recorded on December 20th, "We marched 30 kilometers. No fuel for trucks. We passed abandoned American vehicles with engines running for warmth. They leave engines idling. We march through snow." Medical services were paralyzed. Ambulances couldn't evacuate the wounded. Field hospitals couldn't power generators. Men died waiting for transport that never came. One military doctor testified, "We had excellent surgeons, American medical supplies, but no fuel for ambulances. Men died who could have been saved with 10 kilometers of transport." The discoveries shattered German propaganda about American weakness. Soldiers had been told the Americans were soft, incapable, then saw that the Americans could destroy more than Germany possessed. The diary of Joseph Goebbels, Germany's propaganda minister, dated December 28th, notes, "Reports indicate serious morale issues. Soldiers write of American superiority, undermining our narrative." But stories spread faster than censorship. The myth of German superiority could not survive contact with American logistics. The failure of the Ardennes meant Germany had no choice left but desperate defense. A general testified at Nuremberg, "After the Ardennes, we knew it was lost. We had played our last card and discovered the enemy held all the aces." Recognizing German desperation, the Allies focused on destroying fuel production. By February 1945, German fuel output ceased. The Luftwaffe was grounded, training cancelled. The German army became static, destroyed piece by mobile enemies. Spring 1945 brought surreal scenes. German units surrendered not from defeat, but immobility. Entire panzer divisions stood helpless as the Allies rolled past. One major general described, "We had 42 operational tanks, experienced crews, ammunition, 300 liters of fuel, not enough to reach the next village. We destroyed our tanks and walked into captivity." Meanwhile, the American advance was limited only by traffic jams from the sheer number of vehicles. Patton's Third Army alone had 15,000 vehicles. The fuel crisis of Peipert's battle group demonstrates how industrial capacity determined the outcome of the Second World War. When Peiper stood among those captured fuel drums that December morning, he glimpsed the truth. They were fighting an enemy whose waste exceeded their need. The numbers tell the whole story. German offensive allocation, 19 million liters. Fuel destroyed by Americans, 30 million liters. American daily consumption, 28 million liters. Peiper's capture at Honsfeld, 190,000 liters. Percentage of American daily supply, 0.6%. The Battle of the Bulge killed 19,000 Americans and perhaps 100,000 Germans. It destroyed the German army's last reserves. But its lasting impact was the realization that America possessed incomprehensible abundance. Peiper's discovery was not merely about fuel, it was about the nature of industrial war. Victory belonged to those who produced more oil, steel, and aluminum. Germany never had a chance. The final irony, American forces cataloging abandoned German equipment at La Gleize found 39 perfectly functional tanks left behind solely for lack of fuel. Major Robert Harrison's salvage report noted, "Fuel required, 30,000 liters. Classification, minimal. Source, local reserve. Time, 4 hours." What had been impossible for the Germans 30,000 liters to save their finest tanks, was beneath American notice, a minor requisition from local reserves exceeding Piper's entire combat group capacity. That was Piper's discovery at Honsfeld, not merely that America had more fuel, but that American abundance operated on a scale that rendered German scarcity irrelevant. The war ended when American industrial capacity was fully mobilized. Honsfeld revealed what had been true since 1942. Germany fought the impossible, measuring defeat in liters, while America measured victory in oceans. The Tiger tank remains at the La Glaise Museum, its fuel gauge empty, a monument to the moment tactical excellence met logistical reality and lost. Visitors ask why such powerful tanks were abandoned. And yet, decades later, in that same museum, former enemies shook hands. The German soldier, who once measured every drop of gasoline as if it were gold, and the American soldier who never knew what scarcity meant. Both, in the end, were simply men who did their duty, both recognizing that the true enemy had never been the other soldier, but war itself. Because even amid abundance and scarcity, fire and smoke, what both sides shared ran deeper than what divided them. The courage to defend what they believed right, the loyalty to their comrades, and now the wisdom to build peace where there was once war. The answer: there was no fuel. But there was something far more powerful: reconciliation.